Hi everyone. So thank you so much for your support in purchasing this video lesson. We're going to learn how to do Hills and Valleys bookbinding, and as you've already read in your notes, this is not a lesson in how to assemble pages, but simply how to make the cover, in which you will insert your own method of pages. But I really do want to thank you. I do appreciate all the support, especially since it allows me to carry on doing my crafting in order to share with you all. So a big thank you. For this lesson I'm going to show you three different spine methods. One is a soft hinged, one is a stiff spine, and one is a curved spine. So you will see how to assemble all of these covers. What I think I didn't mention during the filming of the tutorial was when you choose your fabrics, choose something sturdy without stretching. I use a cotton calico, which is very it's not stiff, but it's not, you wouldn't make clothes with it because the drape, you know, there's no drape. It is quite, it's a sturdy cloth. It's a very raw sort of cotton. So that's what I like to use. I like the rustic look of it, but anything like cotton, like linen, should be fine so long as it's not too thin. The other thing, I must make an apology in advance for my fingernails. I've been doing a lot of dyeing the last couple of weeks and there is dye everywhere, so I'm sorry it's still not come out of my hands. They look dirty. I've been going around with zombie hands for the last 2 weeks, but they are clean, and so sorry for that. And I think that's all I need to mention. I will see you back at the end of the video, and I hope that you find something that you enjoy making and that you can create beautiful things with. Okay, so the first version I'm going to show you is a soft hinged version, and for this I have a separate spine, which is quite normal really in bookmaking terms, so we're going to do that kind of arrangement with front and back covers. The weight I'm using at the moment is a 1mm board, 1mm thickness, and if you don't have that, then something like cereal box, that kind of weight is what you're looking for. That's fine. Okay, so this is the inner cover, and what I'm going to do first is attach the spine to my piece of fabric. Now the height of all my pieces is the same, 210mm, and this is going to give us an approximate A5 size finished book. So 210 and 141 across, and as was mentioned in the video, I'm not demonstrating how to make a book block, but hopefully your intermediate skill level will already have taught you that. If not, there is 1,000,001 tutorials on YouTube of how to assemble your pages. But we're starting this video really on the basis that you already have a bit of junk journaling knowledge at least. So you will know, and you will have a preference already how you want to assemble your pages. So that's fine. You do it however you want. I'm doing a traditional bookbinding type. So I have my signatures all sewn together. I have some mull, and I have the paste down papers here just to hold everything together. So I didn't want any gaps between. I'm not inserting pockets and things, so I want a nice flat book block. So I have measured my book block spine, and it is 12mm. So that is the size that I'm doing my spine piece. So what I'm going to do is apply glue to this piece of fabric, and I'm going to cover the entire surface. So I will pause while I do that. Okay, so I've used fabric glue. I'm just using what's available in the UK. That's Anita's Tacky Glue. That's the one that I like the best for fabric, so that's what I use. You use whatever your favourite is. Probably different in whatever country you're in. So that's my spine, and I'm just applying it to the middle of the fabric so that I have a good sized border all the way around. If you are doing a more traditional junk journal, you will have a much wider spine, so it will be almost 2 or 3 inches probably. In the case that you are doing a very wide spine, you want to leave the top and the bottom borders of your fabric quite long, so you want, I would say, at least 2 inches above here. So I'm sorry that I'm using centimetres and inches at the same time. Hope I'm not confusing people too much. I tend to use millimetres because it's more accurate and it's easier to calculate without fractions. But if something is exactly an inch, rather than say 2.5 centimetres, I will just say an inch in my head. So I hope that makes sense. So that's that piece glued to my fabric. Don't saturate your fabric too much, just so that it's evenly covered. And then what I'm going to do is glue my thin piece of board to the fabric also. And that's my other piece. And I just want to level those off so that they're parallel and straight with each other. Okay, and press that down. Now the gap that I have left between the spine and the boards there is the same gap that I want. This is one of the finished books. So let me just focus, come round. Okay, so this is the edge of my cover board. And this section here, so that's about 8mm. That's how much of a gap I want in my spine. So I measure accordingly. Actually, I've just realised for most of these books I have not done the soft hinge version, but I wanted to show you both ways. So actually what I'm doing is just pulling it in another millimetre, and the reason that I'm doing that is to compensate for the thickness of my spine board. So if my spine is 1 millimetre thick, then I want to take that off this measurement. So if I want an indent of 8mm, which is what we're going for, I'll take the 1mm off that measurement, leaving 7, and that's the gap that you want. Okay, so right, what's next is that we just stick these two down. And my glue is drying out as I've been talking. Okay, that's fine. Okay, and you'll notice here that I have 2 more boards, and these are exactly the same as my previous ones, 141 by 210, and these will be the actual cover on the outside. So what I'm going to do now is put this one aside, and I'm going to glue fabric to my front and back covers. So this is my fabric already cut out, so you can see there is a good margin of 1 inch or so on each side. And what I will do is apply glue to this surface only, again using the fabric glue, and again don't saturate too much, just spread it around as much as you can. And don't worry for now about the sides, the edges of your piece. We're only gluing on this top surface right now. Okay, so this is my front, so I'll just work out where I want that placing exactly. So just use your fingers to make sure you've left margin where it should be, and then I'll flip it over and press down. Okay, so I'll pause while I do the other one. Okay then, so that's my back cover. I'm just going to use a bone folder to make sure that's nice and smooth, but do try not to stretch your fabric, don't be too vigorous, because you don't want it warping and stretching. Okay, and now we're going to fold down that edge. Again, finished book. All right. We're going to fold down this edge. Excuse me. Okay, so let's find, where did I put my spine? There we are. So that's my spine section. This is my front, so that will be folded and go there, and this will be folded here and go there, so that will be our finished piece. So let's start with this one, and I'll show you what I do with the corners. So starting at the actual corner of the card, draw lines that run whatever the word is, straight with that edge and straight with this edge, and same on here. So you're just drawing a right angle, a square on that corner. Okay, so we're going to fold in the side, so that means that on the top and the bottom we're going to draw an extra little tag sticking out there, and I'll show you a close-up in a moment. And you draw this tag within the square that you've already drawn, making the square a bit smaller. So Let's see, is that focused? I think so. Okay, so this is the where we will fold. So the tag goes on the other edge here. So that's a square, 1, 2, and then a second line. Now the second line, the distance of the second line is the same as the thickness of your cover board. I'm using quite a thick board, which is 4mm. So my little tag there is 4mm wide. So I'm going to cut now, and I'll start with the tag so that I don't end up cutting that off, because that does happen, and then the rest of that square. And I'm just going to trim the tag, whoops, sorry, so that it's a bit shorter. About 1 centimetre is enough. So start with the tag. So it's just like a little strip that goes along the side of the board to cover the raw edge. I'm just going to trim it like that. So a piece of white paper. So like that. And now I'm going to glue this piece of fabric and the 2 little tags. Okay, that's done. So glue the entire surface of that section and give it a nice crisp fold, and then see your 2 little tags will now fold down along the edge of your card. And so that will cover up any gap in the corner so that you won't see board. It's actually a bit difficult to see because my fabric is not so different to the colour of the board. But hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So that's that one. I'm going to pause and repeat for the other side. So I'll just draw that again so that you are clear. So follow the edge of the, like so. This is the folded edge, so the tag goes on the other. The same thickness as whatever board you are using, might be thinner, might be thicker. And then I'll cut those and glue them. Okay, so I've applied glue to my fabric. It's getting folded over, and the 2 little tags get tucked in along the side to give you a fabric covered corner. There we go. Okay, so let's turn these around so we can see what we're doing. That's back to my spine, and that's my front and that's my back. So we have our tucked in edges here now. So now we're going to glue the covers to the inner cover here. First of all, I'm going to apply glue to this section. And again, for now, I'm not worrying about going down around the edges, but only up to the only on the surface. want to make sure that the edges now are going to stick very well to each other. Okay, I'm not going to glue beyond this section here, so I'm not going all the way up to the fabric, and that's because I don't want too much glue. I'm going to glue this surface also. Just try and get the glue off my hands. Trying to glue that surface also, but I don't want to overlap the glue. So I'm going to glue on here. This is my folded edge, and I'm going to glue like this, only brushing one way out to the edge, because you really don't want glue showing on the front cover. So I am going to apply glue quite well. I want this to stick very well. That's very important, because you don't want a gap once the book is finished between those two cover sections. So do make sure you get the corners and thoroughly along the edge. Okay, so I'm going to use my finger to just get these little tufts of fibre and make sure that there is no glue there. Okay, so I'm going to put the cover section down, and I have to do this like this to make sure I've got this the right way. So I'll put that on the front, so that will go like that. And then I'm going to stick this spine section directly on top, so these two boards are exactly the same size, which makes life much easier. Okay, and press that down. So that's the spine, and that is your folded section. Okay, so I'm going to do the same on this side, so I'll apply glue first to the inner cover. Making sure that the edges are glued well. Don't be too concerned about how far you're coming on this edge. The cover will be glued where it needs to be glued. So long as most of this surface here is covered, you're fine. It actually doesn't have to meet exactly. That's just to avoid getting too much glue there. So long as the edges are glued. And I need some more glue, so I'm just going to pause. Okay, and that's my back cover, so I'm going to glue that the same way. On the folded edge, working outwards. and you don't want excess glue seeping out to that far edge, so do be careful. Make sure the corners are done. And just run your finger along there to get rid of any stray hairs with glue on. And okay, so this way round. So you put your cover down and put this on top. Just going to move along because it's a bit gluey here. Let's do it this way. And again, just feel with your fingers. Make sure they're fitting exactly together and press down really hard. Okay. Okay, now what I'm going to do is put this under weights, just to, so I'll put a book on the top and put something very heavy on top of that. So my boards have dried. I'm now going to turn in these margins. So I'm going to draw a square again that matches the lines of my board, so it continues like that and continues like that. So I have a little square, and I'm going to turn in the bottom here, which means that my tag must be not on the bottom but on the side. So I will draw my tag inwards from this line by the thickness of my board, which will be about 4 millimeters. So I'll come into the square by 4 millimeters and draw another line. So that's there, so I'm going to cut those out, starting with the tag. And then cut out the rest of that square shape, like so, and just trim your tag. Okay, so I'll pause while I do the others. Okay, so the next section we had a little bit of technical difficulty, which means today is the next day, and I have to show you a different book, unfortunately. So that section of video decided it wanted to be upside down, and there's nothing I can do about it. So this is one of the other covers. It's not the soft spine version, so you'll see straight away that it's not in 3 sections, but it's the one that is in one whole section. So I'm going to remove that tape as well. But I'm showing you now, it's at the same stage, and the rest of the construction is exactly the same for both versions. So what I need to do next is fold in the top and bottom of my fabric. So in order to do that, I'm drawing a little square in the corner, which continues straight along that edge and straight along that edge. Now I want a little tab on the side, which is going to cover the edge of my board, so that there's nothing bare showing through on the finished book. And because I'm folding over the top right now, my tab has to be on the side section, so that would be here, and I need to make it a space that is equal to the thickness of my board. Now my board is 4 mils thick, so I'm going to draw another line within my square, which makes my square a little bit smaller, of 4 mils. I'm going to show you properly on this paper so that you can see it clearly. My fabric is quite dark, so it's not showing very clearly. So this is my top corner. That's my book board. The rest is fabric, and this is the 2 lines that I'm drawing, and my second line has to be 4 mils in, so it's going to look roughly like this. And then what I'm going to do is cut those out. I try to remind myself to always cut the tag first, because then I don't end up cutting it off by accident. And I'm just going to trim the little tag to about 1 centimetre, doesn't have to be longer than that. So, well, let's show you the right way around so it's not confusing. That's what we have now. Okay, so I'm going to do that on each side and apply some glue, and I'll meet you back. Okay, I have cut out my corners, and I've applied glue to to the wrong section. Okay, so I'm supposed to apply glue here. So let's go back. Pause the camera. Okay, and back. Alright, so the plan is to stick the top and the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you fold down that, and then you fold the little tag, just goes down the side along the edge of the cover, and that gives you a nice neat corner, and you won't have any bare patches showing through of bookboard. So I'll do that on all 4, just at this corner at the spine. Give that a really good tug. If you can hear that, that's the cat outside playing in a bucket like he likes to. If there's water in it, even better, he likes to tip it over and then get in it. That's our Magnus. So 4th side. A bit of a tatty piece of fabric there, so I'll have to trim that, I think. So give that a good tug at the spine corner. And tuck in your little tags to make that nice neat corner. Okay, now the idea was not to stick the sides down so that I could show you how I miter the corners. Okay, so what I normally do is fold it over. This is before I've glued it, and just by eye, that's your mitered corner, and I draw a line just on the outside of my cut, so that when I actually cut it, I'm cutting away that pencil line. And why that's better to do it that way, to fold it and then cut. If you were to normally cut a corner just diagonal like that into the corner, you're going to get a little gap. What's good about this section, doing it like this, is that you have this little section of a straight line here before the diagonal starts, and that is equal to the thickness of your board, so that covers it quite nicely. So I'm going to do the same here, and I'm going to leave a gap just because I've done it before, so it might be easier for you to draw it, and then tuck that through, and see, that gives you a nice mitered corner. So that's that. Needs a bit more glue. And the same for this side. Alright, so I just applied a bit more glue because it's starting to dry out now, having glued the wrong side. Okay, and just pressing those corners a little bit, make that fabric nice and neat, and you're done. Okay, so this cover is now ready for inserting the book block, which I show you later in the video. I think later, possibly earlier, I don't know, I'm quite confused now because of redoing this middle section of video. Okay, so normally what I would do at this stage is do the thing where you bend it back, and that is definitely later in the video. I'm not going to do it now because I've only just stuck these two boards down, so I haven't had time to dry properly, and I want a really good contact here before I start messing about. So later on in the video I'll show you how to do a second bend in the spine, and that's the bit where I talk about the book opening properly, so you'll be able to add that. This particular one I'm now going to put under weights so that it dries this join very well, but that's how you do your corners, and at this point you'd be ready to insert your book block. Okay, so to insert the book block into the cover, I need a cover and I need a book block. I've used end papers for this book, which are actually sewn in unusually, but excuse me, but don't have to be. But here there are stitches, and it's sewn in like a signature, exactly the same as all the other pages, so they're all sewn together. So the usual way, of course, to add end papers is to tip them in. So you have one folio here that you would just glue along the edge, but I prefer the way that this opens, so that's what I've used. You may not have end papers, you may, like a lot of junk journalers, you may sew your pages onto, say, craft text or a piece of stiff paper or fabric. Whatever your usual method is fine. What I did forget to mention is that if you're not using a book block like this, in order to measure your spine, you want to measure from the first signature to the last signature, so you may have wide gaps in between here, and your book block may actually be quite wide. So doesn't matter from the first one to the last one, just take that measurement and that's your spine. Okay, so I'm going to make sure this is the right way round, yes, and I will start with the back, and I'm just going to insert one of these plastic pockets behind my end paper and find my glue. So let me think. Okay, so I've got the fabric glue again here, and I'm just applying along the edges in an outward fashion always, so that you don't get seeping into the pages. Now I'm going to do this in a bit of a screwy method because I'm running short of fabric glue and I have a lot more notebooks to put together, so I'm trying to conserve glue. My Amazon order has disappeared and not arrived, so we're on glue alert. So normally I would just cover the whole thing in the same glue, but just because I'm running low, I'm going to apply paper glue to this section that doesn't have any fabric. And once again for the spine, outwards, because you don't want to glue the spine itself to the back of the book, to the back of the cover. Okay, so I will remove this plastic. And I will stick this down. So that's that. And I forgot to say that before I glued, I inserted the book block into the cover just to have a look and check it and see how close I need it to be to this edge for it to fit well. So I've already lined that up with my head, and then you glue and stick it down. So before moving that around, I'm going to get another piece of fabric, plastic, and do the same for the front. And again, fabric glue on these sides. Bit of old glue there. So I find these sheets quite good for gluing on. You get them from any stationers, of course. And they only cost about a penny each, but you can reuse them quite a few times, so they're quite useful for being waterproof and such. So outwards, remember no glue on the spine here. Okay, remove the plastic and line up your cover. And I'm just a little bit out of frame, I'm sorry, but I hope you can see at least the top. I need for this to be sort of close to me so that you can hover over it and just make sure that it's all straight. Okay, I think that's about right. So I'm going to press down. And then what I'm going to do before I open the book and start messing about with it, I'm going to put this under a heavy weight again. And you don't have to worry with this type of binding about squashing the spine because of the book boards here. They're so thick and they're elevated above the level of the spine. They're not on the same level. So I can go ahead and weight this and allow the end papers to dry now. So while I've still got a bit of daylight and while my other book is drying, I thought I would make an attempt at getting version 2 filmed. Excuse me. So we have to think about some numbers for this version. So unlike the other one, it doesn't have a soft hinge down the middle. We are constructing the spine and the inner cover out of one piece of 1mm board, the same as last time, but in one section, not 3. So we have to think about these numbers. We've got 141, which is the size of our thick cover boards, and that's exactly the same. I've measured again my book block, and that is 12mm. So I'm going to mark on here, which you'll see I've already done, 141 mils for the cover and 8 mils for the indent, which I want to be the same. And instead of removing a millimetre for the board thickness to compensate, I'm going to leave that millimetre because that will compensate now for a fold in our cardboard. So we have 141 and then 8 and then 12, which is our spine, and then 8 for the other indent, and then this section will carry on for 141 again. Now it's not quite long enough, so I have to add a piece here. So I'm going to mark again the bottom, and these different numbers may sound a bit confusing, but if you're using measurements that are different to mine and boards that are different to mine, then you want to know how to calculate those and where the differences will be. So I'm going to, these two middle lines now are where my spine is, and I'm going to mark those and score them, and I'm going to score them with a knife. And what I suggest you do is to get a piece of scrap board and practice. Pretend you're cutting through and see, no sorry, not pretend, do cut through. See how many strokes it takes to cut all the way through, because you don't want to cut all the way through, you want to do less strokes. So it's quite thin, but I don't really want to do it here. I haven't got my cutting mat, so I don't want to damage this. So I'm just going to do like this. I'm going to go and finish it on my cutting mat so that I'm not in danger of scratching the table here. Okay, so I've scored my board and it's kind of nearly all the way through, and even if you get a tiny bit, where you have cut through, don't worry, it's going to be covered in fabric and you will still get the same effect, so it's absolutely fine. You do want a really good crease here. Okay, so we have our cover. As you can see, one end is short, so what I'm going to do is measure now from my last mark after the indent, 141, and I'm going to just work out how much I need and then cut an extra strip. So I'm going to pause while I do that. Okay, I've got my strip and I'm going to just tape that to the back, which is the side that you have not scored, because we can remove that later once the fabric cover goes on. So with this strip on, my board is the correct size and my spine is in the middle. Does not matter that this is floppy. Okay, so let me just check that measurement. Okay, good, alright. So now I'm going to apply my fabric spine this way and to that middle section. And so I'll pause again. So I've completely covered this in fabric glue. And I've just stuck it roughly into the middle. So you'll see I have an inch or so overhang, and that just folds down. I think I need a bit more glue that side. Okie dokie. So now I'm going to get on with the front covers. So that's the inner cover, and I've misplaced my covers, let me just go find them. Okay, so I have applied glue to the top surface only of my cover, so that's the thick board, and I'm going to so that's my nice fabric. So don't stretch too much again, don't want to stretch your fabric. So that's one. This way, this way. Okay. So, oops, that's not very straight. Okay, so that's that. So now I have my spine and my two boards covered. So that one will be going on there, and this one will be going on here. So it's going to be the same as the soft version, with one extra step. So I will now fold in these two edges. So that's my front and that's my back. And okay. Alright, what I'm going to do now is just trim off some of this fabric because I don't need to glue that much. There's no point wasting glue when you don't need to. And also I will draw my little squares and meet you back. Alright, so what I thought was, just in case you are only watching the hard version and not the soft hinged version, I'll just repeat this step for you to make it easier. So I'm going to fold in this edge here, which when I turn my book over, this is my front cover. So this side is where it attaches to the spine. This is where I want this fold. So what I do is draw a square. So continue along this edge and continue along this edge to draw two lines, like so. And because I'm folding the side, I want my extra line on the other edge, on the top. So this is my original line, and I'm going to move in and draw a second line inside this square section, which makes the square a touch smaller, and the width of this space here is equal to the thickness of your board. So my board is 4mm wide, so I'm going to cut out my 4mm strip here and cut out the rest of that square, and you can just trim that tag off about halfway. About 1 centimetre is plenty. And so I'm cutting first the tag and then the rest of that square section, and just trim off part of that tab. And I'll repeat here. I'll cut the tag first. And now I'm going to apply glue to this section that I'm folding. So to the whole surface of the fabric, you want to get inside the edge of the card there, and also these two little tabs. Okay, so once that's glued, bring it over nice and firmly, so that that edge is quite nice and crisp. Squeeze out that little crease. And then the two little tags, they will just stick down along the edge of the board. where's the other one disappeared to? Okay, that's one. And that's two. Stick the tags down. Okay, and this is the lovely fold that makes that this type of binding quite unusual. So the next step is to attach these to here. So I'll find my spine. Let me just give that a bend. Oh, actually what I forgot is that I like to let this dry a little bit. So I'm going to pause and meet you back. Okay then, so my pieces have dried and I'm now going to attach my covers with the folded edge in the middle by the spine. So I'm going to, now that this fabric has dried well, I'm going to refold very carefully along that score line so that you get a nice crisp edge. So obviously you've got the fabric pulling it at the moment, so we need to bend it back into shape since it's been drying flat. And I'm filming now the next day because we did lose the daylight. So I'm actually making several books at the moment at the same time, in my head I'm trying to keep this cohesive for you so that you're seeing the same book as much as possible, so it's not confusing. Okay. So I'm going to get my bone folder on that as well. You'll find that if you do this before the fabric dries properly, then the fabric's just going to get pulled about and start stretching, so it doesn't look so nice. Okay, so I have my nice spine shape now. I'm going to apply glue to this surface, more or less only where there's cardboard still. I'm not going to be gluing over here because this is where you put your cover section. So I don't want too much glue on this join. I'm going to glue it by gluing this surface and not this surface. And by doing that, I know that I'm going right up to the edge on here, and I'm not going to have any excess showing here. So long as you've got these edges very well glued, and you're going to glue this fourth edge on this side, that's all that we need to be concerned about. So I'm going to just pause while I apply my glue. Okay, so just to show you this last bit, always apply your glue brushing only one direction towards the edge, and then you're not going to seep onto the edges. And not too thick so that it's going to seep when you squash them together. But you do want a good coverage. So just run your finger along because you're brushing hairs from the fibres outwards. Okay, so, and to do this, because I'm dyspraxic, you see, I can't do reversing, so I have to, so you want to put this side down because the fabric is covering the edge, so from the other side you won't see it properly, and lay the spine on top. Okay, and just feel with your fingers, make sure that that's even, and press down. And I will repeat for the other side. Okay, so that's both covers applied, and at this point you can remove this tape because this little strip here where my card wasn't long enough is now no longer floppy because it's got the thick board behind and it's glued in place. So what I'll do now is start turning in my edges, and that's exactly the same as before, so I won't film this side. Okay, so my edge is almost all covered now. Okay, so I thought I'd just leave this last edge just to mention that if you don't want a raw edge on this, so that's the top of your spine, and that's where we fold over to encase both the spine, both the pieces of board. So this section here is a raw edge, and as I said before, for me that's fine. I glue it, the fibres are not going to go anywhere. But if you prefer a folded edge, which is a bit neater, all you need to do is when you cut this cover fabric and you're folding it here, you need to just leave a bit of excess so that you want a diagonal. Let's put that there. So you want to cut it like that. So you have this extra little section, and then you can fold that little triangle, and then you get a fold. So that's that. So I'll just stick this down. And then on this side I've got my mitered corner as before. Okay, so that's my cover. I'm going to, actually let's do the second crease as well when I think of it. So for this thicker board, not thicker, sorry, this wide board here, because we don't have a soft hinge this time, we need to enable the book to open properly, and so this step is very important, and if you miss it out your book will not open properly. So what I'm going to do is put a ruler and just bend this up, so tuck in the ruler right up to the edge of the card, and that helps you get a nice straight edge. And on this side, so you might feel as though you're going to break your book, but don't worry, the fabric actually is holding everything together, so whatever happens really underneath it doesn't really matter. The fabric is stable. If you weren't using fabric, you might want to score that before covering the book. So I'm going to just make sure that's a really good fold, and you can fold it right back so that it's past the what would you call that, a 90-degree angle. So I'm pushing from this side to make sure it bends where I want it to. Okay, so you'll see a fold when you turn the book over here. So like I said, you could score that before construction at the same time you're scoring the spine, but I think you can get a better fit this way once the boards are on. So you'll notice then when you do that that's a slightly different shape. You have, just where my thumbs are, you have another bend. Let me try and get that in there. Yeah, so just there where it's meeting the boards now, you have another bend. Okay, so get a bit of glue on there. So now what I'm going to do is put this under weights again, so that this join here is very secure where you've glued these two boards down. You don't want any gaps, you don't want any gaping, so you want a nice good contact. So I'm going to put a book over and weight it down. Okay folks, I thought I would just show you a third version. So this is how I would go about making a curved spine. Excuse me. I'm going to start with 1mm board, exactly the same, and I've measured same as before, the width of my cover board plus the indent and the spine section. Now when you're measuring for the spine, I would suggest doing a little bit of scrap first. Unfortunately, I don't have a book block at the moment with a curved spine, since I'm making a set the same. So you won't see it finished, but this is how I would make it. In my beekeeper's journal, or for my beekeeper's journal, I did use this method. So if you wanted, you could go and have a look and see what it looks like in a finished book. So where am I? Okay, so actually I need to measure again so I know where I'm scoring from. So 141 is my cover size, 8mm is my indent, and then I have approximately 12mm for my spine. However, because of the curve, your spine will be wider, so this is why you need to just do a practice. So from roughly where my marks are, I'm just going to score right through the fabric on the reverse, and I'm going to score every line on my board. This side of my board is inches, so I suppose this must be 1/4 inches. No, 5/8, sorry, yes, 1/8 of an inch. So just in parallel lines, roughly as wide as your spine, plus a little tiny bit more, just to compensate for the curve, because we know that that will take more material than a straight line between A and B. Okay, so once you think you have enough, I think I need to do a bit more here. I'm not going to be using this board, so I'll do a couple of extra just so that you can see it more clearly. Going a bit wonky here. If your board is thin enough, you'll see this pattern on the other side. On the Beekeeper's version it was visible. It looked quite nice. So you get these little ridges. If you're using thicker board, it might not show so much. Okay, yeah, so we got a bit of patterning on this side. So then you can just go ahead and bend and make sure that you're bending through each score mark, and basically that's it. So you measure your book block the same way from edge to edge, from the first signature to the last signature. And if you're using something with a wide spine, I would suggest rolling it around something. So I have my little rolling pin here, which is probably too wide for this actually. Yeah, so if you're using, doing a big junk journal, oops, you could just kind of press your way around. I'm going to just find something thinner to show you properly. Okay, so the books that I am making at the moment are quite thin, so I don't only be using a thin object like this. So you can just tuck it, make sure it's tucked right in, and just kind of roll it like this so that you get a nice curve, and that card gets kind of softened up between the scores. It gets worn a bit, and so you get a nice curved shape. And then you would just proceed exactly as before. So I will keep that for another occasion. But as I say, all my book blocks are squared off and finished at the moment. So anyway, that's just another idea for you.